Hey everyone, it's Rick Carson, and we're back at the beautiful Make Believe Studios now. We just went on a killer road trip to go visit our good friend Josh Gannett in Morristown, New Jersey, and we picked up a bunch of cool stuff, and one of those things is this, and I want to throw it back to the early days of drum sampling and triggering in general. We first had one-shot samples, and as things started to expand, people thought that one-shot samples sounded a little bit machine gunny and robotic. But how would you go about triggering multiple samples? You had to understand where the industry was at the time. Most people were triggering one-shot samples using such devices as an AMS 1580 or a TC Electronics 2290 with the trigger input, but those were very, very expensive digital delays. And a company from the UK had the bright idea to take the Roland SDE 3000, which wasn't a cheap delay by any means, but a cheaper delay for the time, and come up with a sampling board for it. And it would typically have this little module that you could use to record and play back your sample, as well as go ahead and alter the pitch. In LA, those seem to really catch on. I first encountered a Roland SDE 3000 with the sampling modifications at Henson Studios, and they were in a rack with a control board. They would rack them up with a 1U control unit that would control both of the devices individually. And I always thought, okay, maybe that's for kick and snare. But what I've come to learn as time went on is that rig with the two units was actually typically a snare drum unit in and of itself, thanks to this little device right here. And this is the Little Labs sample switcher. And it is a device that Jonathan Little designed back at his time at A&M Studios for Bob Clearmountain, who was mixing in the mix room there for many years, utilizing SDE 3000s with the sample modification to go ahead and trigger samples. And I guess there was another device called a spanner, which was an auto panner that would pan based on audio input. So when the snare came in, it would pan to the left side, and that output would go to one SDE and trigger, and then it would, a snare drum would hit and would pan to the right side, and that would trigger the second sample. And this device allowed you to set up some thresholds that would, let you pick things a little bit more intelligently than that. You could set it up so that you used one sample unless you had multiple hits that happen within a certain time frame, or you could also set it up so that they flipped back and forth with each individual hit, and a couple other different options. But ultimately, this device was interesting because it didn't run off the audio of the snare drum, in the sense that your audio trigger was what was actually hitting your SDE 3000s. This would take an audio trigger in, and it had pulses that would come out that I don't know if they're a DC signal or what. I haven't actually gone through and tested this yet, but it would send out a pulse signal that was a lot easier to control, and you didn't have to gate and stuff like that. So I just think that this is a very interesting piece of history and time when it comes to where we are now with multi-triggering and round-robin samples and all of the things that happen when it comes to creating a realistic drum trigger. This is a little footnote along that journey. So thanks for checking it out, and I hope you guys have a wonderful day.